if you think a paid-off house and a 401k are going to carry you safely into old age. I want to stop you right there. That belief has trapped millions of intelligent, hard-working Americans in a retirement illusion. And illusions are expensive. The 401k was never designed to carry your entire future on its back. It was never meant to be the whole machine. It was meant to be a supplement, an extra layer, a support beam. What many people did instead was take a support beam and pretend it was the whole foundation. That is how people work for 40 years, do what they are told, contribute every paycheck, and still arrive at the edge of retirement with fear in their stomach. I have spent my life studying capital allocation, incentives, and the difference between owning an asset and merely participating in a system. When I look at the way most people use a 401k, I do not see a retirement strategy. I see a convenient corporate transfer of responsibility. I see employers moving the burden from their balance sheet onto your shoulders and calling it empowerment. A lot of people never noticed when that switch happened. Back in the early years, retirement for a large part of America rested on a different promise. Companies carried pension obligations. The company took on the investment risk. The company had to figure out how to make enough money, how to manage enough capital, how to keep the engine running long after the employees stopped showing up to work. That arrangement put the pressure where it belonged. On the institution, then the 401k arrived, and with it came a new story. The new story was simple. You fund your own retirement, you take the market risk, you take the planning risk, you take the tax risk, you take the longevity risk, you take the inflation risk, you take the sequence of returns risk, and if you arrive at age 65 or 70 without enough, the failure is framed as personal rather than structural. That was a beautiful deal for companies. It was not always a beautiful deal for workers. Now, let me be very clear. I am not telling you that a 401k is useless. That would be foolish. A 401k can be a helpful tool. A good tool, used intelligently, can do real work. But confusing a tool with a complete strategy is one of the fastest ways to get financially ambushed. That is what this whole issue comes down to. Most Americans are not being destroyed by the fact that they have a 401k. They are being damaged by the fact that they misunderstand what the 401k actually is. They think they own a complete retirement plan. Very often what they actually own is a tax wrapper around a limited investment menu with hidden friction, uncertain future tax treatment, and nowhere near enough scale to fund the lifestyle they imagine. That is the dangerous part. The first thing I want you to understand is that a lot of money disappears from a 401k quietly. Not dramatically, quietly. And quiet losses are the ones that ruin people. Because they do not trigger panic, they trigger sleep. Most people know when they lose money in a stock crash, they can feel it. They see the red on the screen. But they often do not feel the drag of fees. And that drag is real. It is persistent. It compounds against you the same way investment returns compound for you. If you are paying high fees year after year after year, you are not just paying a bill, you are surrendering future optionality, you are handing away decades of compounded ownership. Imagine two people doing something very ordinary. Each invests $500 a month, each keeps doing it for 30 years, each earns the same broad market growth before cost. The only real difference is that one person pays a much lower expense load than the other. At the beginning, the difference looks small enough to ignore. That is why people ignore it. A fee difference of 1 percentage point sounds trivial to the untrained ear. It sounds like the kind of thing a person can wave away with a shrug, but money does not care about your shrug. Compounding is ruthless. It does not forgive laziness, and it does not negotiate with percentages over a full working life. That apparently harmless extra fee can eat an enormous chunk of the ending balance. Not because somebody stole your account in one night, because they skimmed your future slowly enough that you never built the habit of objecting. That is why I have always admired low-friction structures in business. In investing in life, friction matters. If you can buy the same economics cheaper, you should pay attention. If you can get broadly similar market exposure while bleeding less every year, that matters a great deal. The investor who keeps more of what he earns has a structural advantage over the investor who is forever feeding toll booths. And many 401k participants are driving straight through toll booths they have never even bothered to identify. Most people do not know the number. They do not know the expense ratio. They do not know whether the plan menu is filled with expensive funds dressed up in respectable language. They do not know whether the thing is matching the market, lagging the market, or charging active management prices for passive mediocrity results. That ignorance is expensive. You do not need to become a professional portfolio manager overnight. But if your retirement plan is supposed to help carry your future, then you have a duty to know what it charges you to exist. Because every percentage point removed from fees is a percentage point that can stay home and work for you. And when you let that saved capital keep compounding for 20 or 30 years, you are not making a small optimization. You are changing the geometry of your outcome. That is the first place where the 401k costs people more than they think. The second place is taxes, and this is where people love slogans because slogans are easier than arithmetic. They hear the phrase tax advantaged and their mind shuts off. That phrase sounds comforting, it sounds intelligent. It sounds like the kind of thing a prudent person repeats at a dinner table. But tax advantage does not mean tax eliminated. It means taxes are being moved around in time. That is a completely different conversation. A traditional 401k gives you a very simple bargain. You defer taxes now. You pay them later. That can be useful. It can also become a trap if you do not think carefully about what later might actually look like. People love to say, when I retire, I'll be in a lower tax bracket. Maybe not. That sentence is not a law of nature. It is a prediction. And it is a prediction built on a pile of assumptions that might not hold. You are assuming tax rates will be favorable in the future. You are assuming your income will be lower in the future. You are assuming your other assets will not produce much in the future. You are assuming the government will not get more desperate in the future. You are assuming the country can carry a mountain of obligations without eventually looking harder at the tax base. That is a lot of assumptions. I never liked strategies that depend on a chain of assumptions staying polite for 30 years. Now compare that to the Roth side of the equation there. You pay taxes up front. The money goes in after tax. Then the growth can come out under much more favorable conditions later. In plain English, you choose certainty now over uncertainty later. Which one is better? That depends on the person. If your current income is very high and you have good reason to believe your future taxable income will be materially lower, the traditional structure may help you. If your current tax burden is reasonable and your real ambition is to build substantial wealth across many assets, many streams, and many years, the Roth starts to look very attractive because it protects future upside from future tax uncertainty. What bothers me is not that people choose one or the other. What bothers me is that many people never really choose. They drift, they sign whatever box is easiest, they repeat what a coworker told them, they follow default settings as if default settings were wisdom. Default settings are usually designed for administrative convenience, not for your long-term financial freedom. If you plan to build wealth beyond your job, then you need to think harder about the tax character of the dollars you are storing away, because the real question is not merely, how do I reduce my tax bill this year? The real question is, when my life is working, when my assets are mature, when my income no longer depends entirely on labor, what kind of withdrawals do I want to face? People who ask weak questions get weak plans. That is the second place where the 401k can cost you more than you think. It can trick you into feeling tax smart when you are actually just postponing a more serious decision. Then we get to the third problem, and this is the one people avoid because it is brutally simple. For many households, the 401k is not large enough, not even close. This is the point where emotion enters the room, because now we are not discussing percentages and account types. Now we are discussing whether the pile is actually big enough to produce freedom. A lot of people have spent years assuming that if they contribute consistently, avoid disaster, pay down the house, and keep the faith, the math will eventually rescue them. The problem is that arithmetic has no interest in your sincerity. If you need a large pool of capital to generate reliable retirement income, then you need a large pool of capital. There is no inspirational workaround for that. You can call it retirement. I prefer to call it financial independence. The label does not matter. The economics do. At some point, your labor income stops, or you want the option for it to stop. When that happens, you need one of two things. You need assets you can sell and still have enough proceeds to fund the rest of your life, or you need assets that pay you enough cash flow for the rest of your life. That is it. Everything else is costume jewelry. If your plan does not produce a large enough saleable base or a strong enough income stream, you do not yet have freedom. You may have a respectable account balance. You may have a good salary, you may have a nice title, you may even have social proof, but if the machine still collapses the minute you stop working, then the machine was never yours. This is where the 401k myth becomes dangerous. A person opens the statement, sees 6 figures, and feels reassured. But reassurance without calculation is one of the most expensive feelings in finance. If your desired spending is $60,000 a year, and you use the old 4% framework as a rough guide, you need roughly $1.5 million of investable assets to support that lifestyle. That number is not a magic, and it is not a guarantee, but it is a useful discipline because it forces the right question: how much capital must exist before the income stream becomes durable? Now place that against the account balances many people actually have. Suddenly the emotional gap becomes visible. This is why so many people wake up late. They were measuring progress emotionally instead of economically. They thought participation meant arrival. They thought making contributions meant the problem had been handled. They thought the statement itself was evidence of adequacy. It wasn't tea. And if you are in your 40s, 50s, or even 60s, this is not the time for shame. It is the time for clarity. Shame wastes time. Clarity reallocates capital. If the 401k alone is not enough, then the job is not to panic. The job is to widen the plan. That means stepping back from the account and asking a more important question. What is your actual wealth building system? Not your retirement account, your system. For a long time, I have believed that personal finance is not improved by vague good intentions. It is improved by allocation rules. Rules create behavior. Behavior builds assets. Assets create independence. One simple framework that I respect in spirit is this: spend less than you earn by a meaningful margin, protect against emergencies, and push a consistent share of income into assets. The exact percentages can vary, but the principle is permanent. If nearly every dollar you make is spoken for before it arrives, then no account structure in the world will save you. Tax advantages cannot rescue a person whose cash flow never leaves room for ownership. So the first real action item is not glamorous. You must create surplus, no serious investing. That surplus then has to be directed with purpose. Some should sit in safe reserves, because life is messy and liquidity is a form of sanity. But the rest has to go where it can compound, not where it can merely feel busy, where it can compound. And now we come to a truth people do not love hearing. The biggest driver of long-term wealth is not just how much you invest. It is also the rate at which that capital compounds. That is where many people lose years. They focus only on contribution and ignore return quality. A person can spend decades pouring money into a structure that grows too slowly because it is burdened by weak fund choices, bloated fees, timid strategy, or simple neglect. Then one day they wonder why freedom still feels far away. Well, growth rate matters. If your money compounds slowly, time becomes heavier. If your money compounds more effectively, time becomes lighter. You do not have to swing at wild pitches to improve that equation. Often the first gains come from doing very ordinary things correctly. Lowering expenses, avoiding chronic underperformance, refusing complexity that serves the seller more than the buyer. Learning enough about markets to distinguish real opportunity from glossy packaging. That is not glamorous. It is powerful. People often imagine that the path to wealth is hidden in something exotic. Very often it is hidden in something embarrassingly basic. Keep fees low, stay rational, keep adding capital, understand your tax position. Refuse to confuse activity with progress. Extend your ownership beyond one employer-sponsored plan if that plan alone cannot do the job. And above all, think in decades. Now, I want to return to the retirement idea because this is where language can mislead people. I have never loved the fantasy version of retirement. The fantasy version says you drag yourself through work, postpone your life for 40 years, then one day stop and hope the spreadsheet holds. I do not find that inspiring. What I find useful is the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of a life where work becomes a choice, where your standards do not collapse if your paycheck stops, and where your calendar is not owned by necessity. That is a very different target. And once you see that target clearly, the 401k falls into its proper place. It becomes one bucket. Helpful? Yes. Sufficient by itself? Very often, no. That means you must decide what other buckets deserve your attention. For some people, that will be a taxable brokerage account filled with sensible, long-term ownership of productive businesses. For some people, that will include real estate. For some people, that may include building an actual business, which can become both a cash flow engine and a saleable asset. For some people, it will be a mix. The answer is personal, but the principle is universal. Wealth comes from owning assets, not from merely earning income. That distinction changes everything. If you earn a lot but own little, you are vulnerable. If you own assets that can be sold or that can produce cash without your daily presence, you are becoming free. That is why I tell people to stop worshiping the account label and start studying the asset engine underneath it. What exactly do you own? What does it cost? How fast can it grow? What are the taxes? What are the hidden frictions? How concentrated is your future in one employer S-plan menu and one set of assumptions? Those are adult questions. And adult questions produce adult outcomes. There's another subtle trap in the 401k conversation, and that is the way convenience can anesthetize judgment. Payroll deduction is wonderful because it automates good behavior, but automation can also produce complacency. Once money is flowing out of a paycheck into a plan, people often feel they have handled the problem. They stop learning, they stop reviewing, they stop comparing, they stop thinking strategically about the bigger picture. That passivity is a luxury you cannot afford. The fact that a mechanism is automatic does not mean it is optimized. You still need to check the machine. You still need to ask whether the match is strong enough to justify your contribution order. You still need to examine whether the available funds are sensible. You still need to revisit whether traditional or Roth treatment aligns with the life you are building. You still need to calculate whether your current contribution rate at current returns gets you anywhere near the capital base you actually need. Hope is not a financial strategy. Participation is not a financial strategy. And blind loyalty to a familiar account is certainly not a financial strategy. What I would urge you to do instead is brutally simple. First, find out what your plan is charging you, not approximately. Exactly. Second, examine what you are actually invested in, not the labels, the underlying economics. Third, decide whether your tax choice is intentional or lazy. Fourth, calculate your real target, not a dreamy target, a real one based on what your life costs and what kind of freedom you want. Fifth, decide whether the 401k is enough by itself. If the answer is no, accept that answer quickly and build the next layer. The next layer matters. A brokerage account with disciplined investing can matter. Additional savings rate can matter. A business can matter. Real estate can matter. Skill, building that raises your earning power can matter. Anything that expands the gap between what you consume and what you own can matter. The common thread is ownership. I do not want you leaving this conversation thinking the 401k is the villain. The villain is passivity. The villain is confusion. The villain is the comforting lie that one familiar account plus a house automatically adds up to security. Security has to be engineered. It has to be measured. It has to be protected from fees, taxes, inflation, bad assumptions, and lazy thinking. That takes work. But the work is worth it because the alternative is much worse. The alternative is waking up late, staring at a balance that looked big 10 years ago and looks frighteningly small. Now, then realizing you built your future on a supplement and mistook it for a complete system, I would rather give you an uncomfortable truth now than let you keep a soothing lie for another decade. So here's the way I would think about it if I were starting from this position. I would absolutely respect the 401k, especially if there is a strong employer match, because free matching dollars are attractive. I would study the fees like an owner. I would choose the tax treatment deliberately, not emotionally. I would insist on understanding the investment options instead of outsourcing thought to default menus. I would calculate what level of capital actually creates independence for my household, and if the account was clearly not enough, I would stop pretending and start building outside it immediately. I would not wait for some magical future income level. I would not wait for the perfect market. I would not wait until retirement was 5 years away. I would act while time still has room to help me, because time is the great partner in compounding, but only if you put it to work before panic takes over. There is one more point I want to make, and it is one that many people miss after they finally pay off major obligations. When an expense disappears, do not let that cash flow vanish into lifestyle inflation. That is one of the greatest leaks in the American financial life. A car gets paid off, the payment disappears, the lifestyle expands to absorb it. A mortgage gets smaller, the freedom appears. Consumption rises to meet it, a debt dies. People celebrate by replacing it with a new obligation, wearing nicer clothes. That is backwards. When a recurring payment disappears, that is a chance to redirect a river of cash into ownership. That is how ordinary incomes become uncommon outcomes. Not through drama, through redirection. If your 401k is the only place that redirection ever happens, then your system is too narrow. You need a broader architecture. You need assets in more than one lane. You need to understand not only where the money is going, but what kind of future that destination can realistically buy. In the end, the question is not whether the 401k is good or bad. The question is whether you are using it as a useful component or worshiping it as a complete answer. Those are radically different things. A useful component can help you. A false answer can ruin you. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Retirement is not created by account labels. It is created by asset ownership. It is created by disciplined surplus. It is created by understanding fees before they hollow out your future. It is created by understanding taxes before they ambush your withdrawals. It is created by calculating the actual capital base your life requires. It is created by building more than one stream of financial strength. And it is created by refusing to let a company plan define the limits of your imagination. Your 401k can be part of your wealth story. It should not be the entire plot. If all you do after hearing me today is open your plan, check the fees, study the holdings, rethink the tax choice, calculate your real target, and admit whether you need more than this one account, you will already be behaving more intelligently than a very large percentage of the country. That is not because the bar is high. It is because so many people mistake motion for mastery. Do not make that mistake. Own the math, own the decisions, own the assets. And then, over time, you give yourself the one thing the average retirement story fails to deliver: real freedom.